Hi everyone, welcome to the show today. I would like to talk to you about the clauses in your builder's contract that impact time and liquidated damages and when you have to complete by.
Are you an Aussie tradie and your paperwork is shady? Do the dockers farm side keep you up late at night? Are you sick of pushing paper, swinging your tools as more you caper? Call us the tricks of your trade.
Welcome to the Tricks of Your Trade podcast, where we talk about trade business topics to help you get through business life unscathed.
Does the builder pay you late and your cash flow fluctuates? Do you dread the office work? Can't afford a full-time clerk? Consider working smarter. Don't be a business martyr. Call us the tricks of your trade.
Hello, welcome to the Tricks of Your Trade podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Serson, construction lawyer, adjudicator, and director of Tricks of Your Trade. This is a really hot topic because post-COVID, where builders have been under incredible financial stress, we have seen a significant increase in the number of builders who are trying to use liquidated damages as a way out of paying their subcontractors. There have been more than a handful of instances in the last 12 months where subcontractors have been either sued by builders or demands have been made to subcontractors by builders for liquidated damages in circumstances where the subcontractor had nothing to do with the delay. In fact, in some instances, the subcontractor actually helped the builder pick up time where the builder had problems in their own program. But unfortunately, in Australia, the cases and the law around liquidated damages and extensions of time are not very helpful. So it's not a common sense approach where it should be about if you actually delayed the builder. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. A lot of subcontractors think that they should be able to argue some kind of fairness reasoning for or fairness defense on why they shouldn't be the ones that have to pick up the bill if the builder's project runs late. So when you're doing your contract reviews, I would love, love, love for you to check these 6 clauses that have a bearing on time under your contract. Because if you can make sure that these clauses in your contract help you or are set up so that you can properly administer the contract, then you actually have a fighting chance to mitigate liquidated damages. Now, the first one is the commencement clause, and it follows that the other one would be the completion clause, right? So where we're looking at your date for practical completion or your completion date, that is about whether or not you actually have a realistic program, whether the timeframes available for you to do specific tasks in your scope of work are sufficient. But when it comes to commencement, a lot of contracts don't actually say when you're going to get a run on site. So you need to locate in your contract the section that's either going to be a clause that talks about when you will start work on site, or in the particulars, the date for commencement. And if there's no fixed date for commencement, or if the date for commencement is not in line with what the builder is telling you, you need to be picking up on that and changing it now, so that if you don't get a run when your date for commencement comes around, you have the ability to say, I'm being delayed, I was supposed to be on site now, and so please give me an extension of time. And you would do that properly using the notice clauses under your contract. You wouldn't just ask like a very nice person. So the very first one is check your commencement date in your contract, and check the clauses governing your commencement date to make sure that they don't say that the builder can change it whenever they want, and that you won't be entitled to an extension of time if they do change that commencement date. Likewise, with your completion date, needs to be a reasonable amount of time. If you've got a set date for completion in your schedule, in your contract, but the program attached to the contract is something entirely different, you need to be addressing that before you sign that contract. Work out when they actually think you're going to be completing and chase that down, because as you are administering the contract, it's going to become problematic for you if you can't work out when you should have reached practical completion. So you won't know how many days to ask for an extension, or you won't know what date to ask for the PC date to be extended to if you can't work out what that date was in the first place. Now, the definition of practical completion is another really important factor with your contract. Now, most Australian standard contracts, if you go to the definition section and you have a look at where it says date of practical completion, it will normally say the date evidenced in the practical completion certificate that your builder gives you, or some other date decided by an arbitrator or a court. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never been given a certificate of practical completion by a builder. That's saying something. I work with another consultant, Cara from SubECA. She got one once and she actually put it into a picture frame. So that goes to show you how rare it is that you would actually get given a certificate of practical completion by your builder. So what you need to be doing is having a look at that definition of the date of practical completion. And I like to cross it out and I like to write when the subcontractor meets the definition, when the subcontract works, meet the definition of practical completion. And then you need to go and find the definition of practical completion and cross out all the things in the list that you're not going to do. If you are a plasterer and you're not giving as-builts, cross it out. If you're not giving operation and maintenance manuals because you're a demolition subby, cross it out. If you're a form worker, maybe you need to change that definition of practical completion to say, when I top out of the main structure. So these contracts, even though they're definitions, you might be thinking, oh, well, I can't change a definition of the contract. Yeah, you can. You can change anything in the contract. It just needs to reflect what the actual arrangement is. So it's quite important that you are making sure that your contract marries up with what you are going to be doing on site and is appropriate for your trade. Now, qualifying causes of delay. Hopefully you understand, if you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, hopefully you know a little bit about qualifying causes of delay already. But if you don't, I just want to make sure that everyone listening knows what I'm talking about. Qualifying causes of delay are the fancy pants name that lawyers call the list of things you're allowed to get an extension of time for. Sometimes they call them an excusable delay or a delay event. So it's not always going to be the case that you can control F this and look for a qualifying cause of delay. You can normally find this in the definitions, and then it will usually say one or two things and anything else stated in item XYZ of the schedule. When you go to item XYZ of the schedule, no doubt in that spot it will say no other qualifying causes of delay, or nil, or not used. So what you need to do is think about what is going to delay you in your construction project and write it in the list. You need to be writing down inclement weather and the effects of inclement weather, delays by third parties having authority or control over the site and or access to the site, including picketing. So if there is a union march or something like that that's preventing access to the site, you're entitled to an extension of time for that. It could well be that you need an extension of time for changes in the law. So if something comes along that changes the building code that gives rise to a variation or something like that, you would need to get an extension of time for that. You should have acts or omissions of the builder, the principal, their agents, subcontractors, and consultants, or their representatives. So an act or omission basically means anything they do or do not do to you that delays your run on site. So you need to be able to get an extension of time if the principal or the builder delay you. So look for those words, any act or omission of the builder or the principal, their agents, consultants, other subcontractors. Now, one thing I like to always put in there is any direction by the builder to resequence the work to the extent that the work that you were going to do is done later. So there will be clauses in the contract that say the builder is allowed to resequence your work. You really need to have an extension of time for that if they resequence your work such that the bulk of the work that you were going to do is done later in time. That can have an impact on whether or not you can still reach your date for practical completion. So qualifying causes of delay. Now, there's one last little nugget I want to tell you about here. Builders, lawyers get a little bit fancy and they will write acts or omissions of the builder, but not any act or omission otherwise permitted by the subcontract. What that means is if the builder does or does not do something to you that delays you, you would be entitled to an extension of time except if the contract somewhere else says that the builder is allowed to do it to you. So if you use resequencing of the work as an example, or perhaps it could be that the builder suspends the work under the contract because there's a dispute with the head contractor, or because they find asbestos or some safety issue arises and they suspend the work, it could well be that you're not entitled to an extension of time because of that exclusion in that little note that says, except to the extent that the act or omission is otherwise permitted or allowed by the contract. So you need to be crossing out that little markup. Now, in terms of qualifying causes of delay, you really need to understand for your trade what is likely to delay you. I don't recommend you go asking for a raft of qualifying causes of delay for things that just will never come into play. If you're working inside the building and there is no chance that inclement weather is going to affect you, perhaps you can give up on that. But bear in mind that inclement weather might not be rain. It could well be heat or humidity that is so intense that your staff are not safe to work. In that instance, you would need an extension of time. Now, of course, you're going to look for the liquidated damages and the delay costs. So these are two things under your contract that are going to have a bearing on whether you can survive this ride. So liquidated damages, I always recommend that you try to get them capped at an amount equal to or less than your retention. That means that you have quarantined your risk, hopefully, under the contract for an amount that should be able to be swallowed, because you are usually used to not getting your retention for a period of time after you've completed the work. So always try and get a cap for 5% or less. That said, if you're signing a $150 million contract, perhaps 5% is not a good amount, and you should be asking for a cap much less than that. Now, delay costs, you can use that as a lever to argue liquidated damages down. So most builders' contracts will say you're not entitled to delay costs. And that's where you need to be saying to them, well, hey, you guys have got liquidated damages in here. So if you guys are going to have liquidated damages, why would I not be entitled to delay costs? And then you need to back that up with some logic around why you actually do incur costs when you're delayed. So explain to the builder, if you don't start this job for the next 6 months, I've got 40 guys that are standing around waiting to go to site. I don't have another project that I can just send them to, because you might call me back at any given time. And if you do that, I would need to pull those guys off that other job. So it's not reasonable to say that I don't have delay costs. You need to be able to argue your way into substantiating those costs. So liquidated damages and delay costs, use them to lever the other one in your favour. Now, in terms of notices that you need to give under the contract, this is how you protect yourself from liquidated damages. If you get everything right and in your favour in the contract, you will still have to give notices of delay and claim extensions of time under the contract. That's because if you don't, you could be in breach of contract. But also, you want to actually let the builder know if something's holding you up. That is how problems get fixed, is you have to communicate it. So when you look at your notice clauses, it'll usually be in the time section of the contract. And there will usually be a procedure that requires you to first give a notice of delay, then give an extension of time claim. Then if the delay keeps going, you might have to give further extension of time claims. So what you really want to do is make sure that you have a reasonable amount of time to be able to give those notices under the contract. So if you're in a situation where it wouldn't actually be practical for you to be able to give a notice every single time you were delayed within 7 business days, you need to be able to explain to the builder why that's not reasonable. Use trade-specific examples when you are explaining that to the builder, because it could well be that if you're the plasterer and you're dealing with 5,000 doors and door hardware, and changes are being made on the fly to the door hardware that's actually delaying your guys fitting off the door hardware, those notices might have to be given. You might have 3 or 4 notices every single day of the week that you have to send to the builder. So to keep on top of all of those notices could be a real burden. make sure you have sufficient time under the contract. The industry standard for this is 3 business days for a notice of delay after you become aware of the delay, not when the delay started and you didn't know about it because you went on site. It's 3 business days from when you become aware of the delay, and 5 business days for an extension of time claim. But if you are the type of trade that has a unique reason why you need longer, maybe it should be 5 and 10. So have a look at those time for giving notices clauses in your contract. They're called the time bars, the timeframes that you have to give the notices to the builder for, and make sure you've got enough time. Now, the last thing that I want you to look for in your contract when it comes to resetting time is the suspension clause. So most builders' contracts will say the builder can suspend the work in certain circumstances. And in all the circumstances other than it's you that caused the suspension, you should be getting an extension of time and you should be getting the costs of suspension, because it's very likely that unless the builder was the cause of the suspension, that the builder's probably getting paid under the head contract for suspension costs as well. But if you are not entitled to an extension of time for a suspension under the head contract, or a suspension by a third party having control or authority over the site, then you're going to find yourself in a situation where you won't be entitled to claim an extension of time. And you could well find that 3 or 4 months passes before you can get back to site. Now, all of those things that I've talked about in this podcast, it should be common sense that you would not be stuck with liquidated damages if any of these things happened. But it's just not the way the cookie crumbles in terms of the law. The law says that if you sign up to a contract that requires you to do certain things, like give notices of delay and claim extensions of time, and you choose not to give it, then you have elected not to obtain an extension of time under your own contract. So you won't get any relief there. Guys, I hope this was helpful. I know this is probably a little bit more of a heavy topic compared to some of my normal podcasts, but I have been getting some requests from people to give a little bit more of an educational guidance on how to do these contract reviews and what you should be looking for. So I do have a comprehensive contract review checklist on my website. If you go to my website, www.tricksofyourtrade.com.au, you can find the checklist. There's a big banner across the top of my homepage that says Get My Contract Review Checklist. Go and have a look at that. And it's only $100. It's a $100 checklist. If you can't find $100 in savings or a windfall because you've used that resource, I'll eat my hat. All right. The next one that I'm going to do of these podcasts is going to be about variations. So if you enjoyed this and you want to listen to a little bit more of a technical, educational type podcast about how to do your contract reviews, make sure you tune into the next one.
If you have any questions about what I've talked about on this podcast, feel free to drop me a good old-fashioned email at questions@tricksofyourtrade.com.au. If you would like a systematic approach to your contract administration and getting paid, head on over to our website and check out the Subbies Toolbox. You won't be disappointed there. And just one last time, our web address is www.tricksofyourtrade.com.au.
Are you an Aussie tradie and your paperwork is shady? Do the dockers farm side keep you up late at night? Are you sick of pushing paper, swinging your tools more you caper? Call us the Tricks of Your Trade.
Welcome to the Tricks of Your Trade podcast, where we talk about trade business topics to help you get through business life unscathed.
Does the builder pay you late and your cash flow fluctuates? Do you dread the office work? Can't afford a full-time clerk? Consider working smarter. Don't be a business martyr. Call us the Tricks of Your Trade.